Yeah. Hey, Don.
How's it going, Tony?
Oh, cool. We got sound. We got sound.
You got the PowerPoint okay?
Yeah, well, we're good. We're on the we're live. We just did our tests and stuff because it's been a while, but we're up and running. We're good to go.
Yeah, sorry I'm late there. Just
That's all right.
as you can imagine, it's
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I know. Well, for our live
chaos.
viewers, Don's busy. He's a busy man.
Yep, yep.
Oh, he's probably still getting his headset. Oh, he's getting ready.
All right.
Oh, I don't know. It's just Don. Yeah. I think he'll probably put on his regular headset. He's probably just plugging it in. It's not my computer. Hey, Don, can you
Tony,
talk? What's that? Don, can you hear me?
very
Oh,
faintly.
I know. Can you we're just doing mic tests here. There's like a slight buzz. We're just fixing it on our
Yeah, you sound very far away.
It's not like buzzing. It's just like not like a. I know, but it's not like terrible. Like it's not buzzing right now. Just yeah. I mean, we'll try to fix it for radio, but I mean it's adequate. Or nothing we can do is use the headset. Like without it's 5 minutes to go. So it seems to sound alright though. I mean, it could be his web connection as well. Oh, here. That might be it. I'd move your mic down a little bit, Don, because it's just only your chin.
How's
If you
that?
care about that.
How was that?
That's what I just said. Oh, camera, yeah. If you want to move your camera, I meant
Oh, camera. Oh, okay.
because it's just you just don't use your chin. But if you don't care about that, that's up to you.
Well, I mean, I do care, Tony.
I know you care about a lot of things.
I do. I care about a lot of things. Tony,
Yes, sir.
did you see my music selections for this
I
afternoon?
did. I thoroughly like that.
I'm glad. Did you try any of them out at all?
I no, I know most of them. So,
Oh, you do know George Clinton then. Okay.
oh
I
yeah,
wasn't sure if you did.
oh, of course. How do you not? The guy's like the progenitor of hip hop music.
Funk, yeah, the Funk Master, I
Yeah,
like to
Funk
call him.
Master, man. Radio says that too. Yep. That's gonna be fun today. No, next week.
someone drop something?
It's just me moving the studio desk. The mic's
Ah,
attached to it. So do you just lead? You're gonna lead this one, and then I'll join in the radio show. Is that the?
yeah, I think so, Tony.
Okay.
Unless you want to jump in on this, feel free. But usually,
Yeah,
it's like
yeah,
a
you'll be fine.
solo 20-minute effort, something
Okay.
like that.
I'll just mute me and
But
then.
yeah, if you want to jump in at any point, if you want to, ask questions
Okay.
or whatever, please feel free to.
Awesome. Okay, I'll go. Here, just mute me and then yeah. I just said I just said I'm going mute, but I'll say it again. Okay. You want me to say it to him? Okay, I'm gonna go silent now, Don. Well, have a good
Okay.
show. Have a
Yep.
good show.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back. It's our first show in 2026. And my name is Don Parkinson, and I'm a senior engagement specialist with Atkins Realis. Today, we're continuing our series of live stream and radio topics on the Northern Road Link project as it moves through the provincial environmental assessment and federal impact assessment processes. The topics we cover parallel our project activities, so we hope these help our viewers and listeners get a better understanding of the project and provide, and we hope that our listeners and viewers provide input along the way as well. And as I mentioned, we like to talk about various topics relevant to the environmental assessment or impact assessment process. And today is no exception. Uh, in today's live stream, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the selection of the preferred corridor, which is the stage that we're at now. And so we've now selected the preferred corridor. In the next couple of weeks, we will be conducting open houses in Thunder Bay, Geraldton, and Timmins. And so today we're going to talk about a bit about that process. We've divided this into two parts actually. So the first part is going to take us to the point where we share the results of this process. And then next week, same show, same time, we're going to do the same thing. Just so everyone knows as well that we have a radio show on Wawate Radio Network at 2 p.m. today and next week as well, where we do similar presentation, similar discussion, same topic, but we mix in some music and some chatter between myself and various characters and people that might pop up along the way during our show. You never know who's going to pop in. And so it's always fun. The radio show is always fun as well. So um, please try to tune into that as well. So why don't we get started now? So now what we're talking about, just to break this down a bit for everyone, is the selection of the what's called the preferred corridor. So the process we've been going through is not to identify the exact position of the road on the land. What it is a process to identify a corridor. And so if you can imagine the corridor is defined by a kilometer on either side of an approximate position of the road. So um, we go through various initially we go through various processes to identify generally what route is going to be followed, and then what we do is we using GIS tools. We do a kilometer on either side of that and get what's called a corridor. So today we're going to run through the some of the corridor options, and then how we evaluate those corridor options to identify a preferred corridor that we will take forward, through the rest of the environmental and impact assessment process. So if we can move to the next slide, I'll run through what we're going to talk about today. There should be a slide before that, if we can bring that up. Before that one as well, too. There we are. That's better. So what we're going to run through today is the method for evaluating the corridor alternatives. We're going to identify corridor options. We're going to talk about factors, criteria, and indicators. Talk about the weighting and scoring system, and then the data limitations. And then next week, we're going to do a quick review of what we talked about this week, and then go through the results of the analysis. So let's move on to the next slide and talk about the evaluation of the corridor alternatives. So it's essentially a 7-step process, beginning with step 1, surprisingly. And step 1 is what's called a SWOT analysis, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So imagine looking at each one of the alternatives and doing sort of a good and bad, or advantages, disadvantages type of process. That's what we're talking about here. So it's sort of like a preliminary sort of what you call subjective. So not where you're measuring things yet, but where you're looking at each of the options and thinking about them and saying, what would be the good things about them, like the strengths? What would be the bad things about them, the weaknesses? What opportunities would that corridor offer, if any? Are there any threats? Are there any negative things associated with that? So that's sort of a high level, the sort of initial first high level process that's gone through. And then we choose the ones that we want to take forward for what's called multi-criteria analysis, which is a fancy way of saying taking all kinds of different information and combining it together to evaluate, to test each one of these corridor alternatives in order to help figure out which one might be preferred and stand out. And then step 3 is called identify factors, criteria, and indicators for the multi-criteria analysis. So it's like, what things are you going to use in that process, that multi-criteria analysis? What are you going to look at? Criteria are the things that you're looking at and you're evaluating when you're comparing the different alternatives. So I'm going to get into what factors, criteria, and indicators are coming up in a minute. But that's step 3. And then step 4, after we've identified the things to consider when we're looking at all of these things together, we compile the data, meaning you make layers, GIS layers, from each of these things that we're thinking about it of using, wanting to use in our analysis, and then you run the model. And when I talk about running the model, what do I mean? Well, I mean using computer software, which is typically, if anyone is familiar with this, geographic information system software. So using that software, taking those layers and overlaying them on each other, and then overlaying those on top of the different corridors, the corridor alternatives. And then you'll see this on the screen here. You'll see these arrows that go back and forth. And so what happens is you have this refining and rerunning of the model. It can take some time. It's not all done instantly. So this is what we mean by iterative. It goes back and forth. Oh, you try this, you go back again, you refine this. Oh, we have another layer, add that layer, run it again. And then you get to where we are right now, where we have looked at the results of this complicated kind of overlay analysis and identified a recommended preferred corridor. And then after that, we take it to the next level, which is get feedback from Indigenous communities and stakeholders. And that's what efforts like the open houses that are coming up are about. That's where we get that feedback. Now, we've been getting feedback along the way in the process of doing this from people to figure out what factors to consider, what criteria and indicators to use. We've been doing that, but then it's a continual process. So now that we've identified a preferred one, we're continuing to get that feedback. So that's the final step. So if we can move to the next slide, please. And this one talks a bit about that SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So in 2021, we identified two corridors, the existing corridor west and the existing corridor east. Then in 2024, we had additional corridors requested by the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada related to caribou. We called them West 1 corridor and West 2 corridor. And then we, again in 2025, ran another SWOT analysis to look at the strengths and weaknesses, opportunities and threats. And that concluded that the existing corridor west was the most favorable one. And then to move ahead with the more detailed kind of analysis or evaluation, we recommended looking at the existing corridor west and the existing corridor east. Those were the two corridors we took forward. We can move to the next slide, please. So this one gets a little complicated. I'll try and simplify it as much as possible, but the bottom line is we're trying to identify the number of different options to evaluate based on those corridors. So along different stretches of the corridor, we have options. So sometimes we can go one way, sometimes we can go another way. And so what this slide talks about is what those different options are. So if you are able to look at the map here, you'll see F1 and F2 at the top. One's in light green, that's F1. The other one's dark green, that's F2. These are two different options of going from one place to another. So we go through, we break it down. We break down the road into these little segments. And then sometimes there's only one way that we see as being the best way to go. Sometimes there's two ways or maybe even three ways. So what we do is we go through and we do a very detailed evaluation of these different options. And that's what our process is. So it's what I'm trying to get across here is that it's complicated and thorough, the process, but it's also like transparent. So it's fairly clear. Like people can see what the layers are and how they've been valued. So it's not like this goes into a black box and then all of a sudden something comes out and you don't know what happened to get there. You can actually follow the process and identify how everything sort of fits together. So if we move to the next slide, let's talk a bit about the approach and these factors, criteria, and indicators. So when we look at these different corridor alternatives, they're based on factors, criteria, and indicators. And so what are these things? Well, factors, criteria, and indicators are tied to the values in the environmental assessment terms of reference, okay? The terms of reference, for those who aren't familiar with it, or the tailored impact statement guidelines, which is the sort of federal kind of version of that, they outline what is going to be studied as part of the environmental or impact assessment. And so the factors, criteria, and indicators are tied to that and what's called valued components identified by government agencies. So valued components are the things that are studied, that are looked at as part of the environmental assessment, the impact assessment. And we get those valued components by creating them or bringing them forward as technical experts, talking to the government agencies to find out what they want as a valued component that's important, that they feel as important as a government agency. We talk to Indigenous communities and find out what's important to them. We talk to Indigenous groups as well about that. We talk to the general public, and then we talk to stakeholders as well too. So that identifies sort of all the things to consider when doing this evaluation of the different corridors, the corridor alternatives. And those are all used to complete this multi-criteria analysis, or MCA, that I talked about before. That is that process of comparing the good things and bad things of the different corridor options. And then the project team, as I sort of touched on before, uses computer software tool. And that software tool takes those layers, overlays all those layers on each of the corridors, and then identifies basically, based on how you set it up, you know, the preferred areas, the good areas, and the bad areas, and everything in between. And so what it works with is GIS layers, geographic information system layers. So imagine each of these criteria or indicators are set up as layers, and then they're laid on top of each other using the computer software. The software allows very complicated these complicated overlays to occur in a fairly short period of time and generate results. So that way you can look at different scenarios or situations. We can move to the next slide, please. So this will give you a better breakdown exactly what we mean by factors, criteria, and indicators. So a factor is sort of a general sort of container, general group of things. So if we take, for example, biological environment, which you'll see on the screen there, that's a broad category. Within that, you could have things like, in our study area, you could have things like caribou, wolverine, bats, fish habitat, and wetlands. And for example, um, technical considerations. That's kind of a broad, sort of general category. In there, you could have constructability. So how easy or difficult is it to build the road in a particular like location? Design, or does this design, is it a more expensive design because of certain reasons? Is it expensive? What are the relative costs? So that's what we talk about when we talk about factors. And when I was giving examples like under technical considerations, when I was talking about things like constructability and design or cost, um, these are what you call criteria. So criteria sit within factors. Factors are the general categories. Criteria are sort of like the components that come out of the factors. So biological environment, caribou, wolverine, bats, fish habitat, wetlands, those are criteria. And then we have this other thing called indicators. And indicators are sort of a way of measuring. So um, somehow you want to try, where possible, to measure potential impacts when you're comparing these road corridors. So the indicators are what is being measured for each criteria. So for example, if a bridge is going over a river, what is the area of fish habitat impacted? That allows you to help sort of quantify or put a number on possible impacts on the aquatic environment. So that's just one example. Um, you could also look at other examples, like, for example, when they do vegetation clearing, right? Clearing and grubbing to clear the route for where the road would go. How big an area? How much vegetation? What land area is being cleared, removed of vegetation in a particular, along uh, one of the corridor alternatives. So that's what we mean by those terms. If we can move to the next slide, please. So this one is just another example of sort of what I was talking about. So we have indicators as the things that we want the model to consider, right? Something measurable. Area of aquatic habitat impacted, for example. And then when we see the term data set is like a GIS layer that represents that. So a GIS layer that represents the amount of um, like the different types of land types. So it could be forest, it could be riparian, which is beside a water course, it could be a lake or a river, things like that. You have a couple of examples on this slide. Indicator being the area of water bodies. So if the road crosses a water body, like a lake or whatever, what is the impacted area? How much of the lake does that road sort of cover, per se? And then if you look at provincial parklands, um, how much of a provincial parklands is being covered, uh, or is part of the footprint of the road corridor? That's another example there to help explain that. And if we can move to the next slide, please. All right, so now, if that isn't complicated enough already, let's take it to another level. So then we have what we call a weighting and scoring system. So to make it a little bit more complicated, we can, if we want, make some factors more important. So that some factors might have more influence on the result than others. So if you look at different factors like indigenous land use and interests, biological environment, socioeconomic environment, physical environment, and technical considerations, we're treating them all equally in this work. However, you can make this model very sophisticated and weigh some factors more than others. And then within each weight, you you can do scoring, which is how you represent each indicator in the model, like the relative importance of each indicator within each criteria. So it could be uh, area of trap lines, right? Number of hunting areas, number of historical sites, area of uh, nursery habitat. Uh, you could so for each factor, for example, under Indigenous land use and interest, it has a weight of 20%, right? Equal weight as to that of biological environment, socioeconomic environment, physical environment, technical considerations. But within that, 20%, 20 points are attached to the area of trap lines that would be impacted. 40%, 40 points would be number of hunting areas impacted, and then another 40 points could be tied to the number of historical locations. So the scoring is another way of measuring potential impacts and another way of helping us decide a preferred corridor. Let's move to the next slide, please. All right, so the model isn't perfect. It's pretty good, and we have really good data, lots of it too, to go into the model. And the model, what I mean by the model is the software essentially that runs all this. You set everything up and then you run the software, and the software does all these overlays, laying all the layers on top of each other, and then comes up with a result. So you've heard the old saying, garbage in, garbage out. So if your data is not very good, then you can't expect a really good result. We have very good data, I would say, pretty comprehensive group of layers that has been compiled for this area, for where the project area is. And then you always have to think about what's not in the model too, right? And factor that into the decision-making process. And then some things, some data, some indicators are too complicated or may not be complete or may not even exist, and they can't be included in the model for that reason. So next slide, please. Then we get to factors and criteria weighting. So you see on this table here, you have, within uh, Indigenous land use and interest, you have 3 criteria. Each is weighed equally. So Indigenous land and resource use, Indigenous value or interest, Indigenous cultural continuity. One example, on the technical consideration side, you've got criteria including constructability, uh, when it comes to permafrost, constructability on a scale of 1 to 4, where 1 is the best for building a road and 4 is the worst for building a road, and then cost. So that sort of gives you an idea of the different factors. If we can move to the next slide, that the table continues, and you get into things like the biological environment, which is, as you would imagine, one of the most important ones. So you've got fish and fish habitat, species at risk fish and fish habitat, caribou, moose, forest birds, raptors, which are birds of prey, shorebirds, bog and fen birds, and other wetland birds, bats, species at risk like wolverine, bank swallow, chimney swift, eastern whippoorwill, short-eared owl, aquatic species at risk like lake sturgeon, and then sort of ecosystems, wetland, upland, and riparian as well. So a lot of factors, a lot of information going into this process of doing this overlay, this evaluation to figure out which corridor is preferred. So that's the story about how we get um, to the model and running the model. And that's what I was going to focus on today. And then next week, what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the results of this. So we'll do a quick overview of what we talked about today so people can get a bit of a refresher. And if they didn't hear it this week, then they can have an idea of what it's all about. And then next week, we'll get into showing you the preferred corridor, showing you, in map form, in image form, so to help you better understand sort of what this all ends up producing, to help you sort of understand that the process is very transparent, that is very open. So that wraps up today's discussion, and we hope it was helpful, and we hope it encourages you to join us again next week when we talk about the results. And please don't forget to keep in touch with our project team members via the contact information available on our website, northernroadlink.ca. It's on our screen right now. And we will see you again next week. Miigwech. And make sure to look out for those project updates on social media and our website. See you next week.